A blood-curdling roar shatters the jungle's tranquility as three massive canines freeze in their tracks. 30 yards ahead, a muscular jaguar crouches on a fallen log, its amber eyes locked on the dogs. The Dogo Argentino's white coat gleams against the verdant backdrop, while the Corso and Presa Canario's powerful frames tense for battle. In this moment, survival hangs by a thread. Three domesticated guardians facing nature's perfect predator on its own turf. Before we continue, if you enjoy epic animal encounters and survival stories, make sure to click that subscribe button. This is the best way for you to support our work. Thank you very much, and let's continue. The morning had begun like any other, in the remote research station nestled at the jungle's edge. Dr. Elena Fuentes stood on the wooden deck, sipping her coffee as she watched the sun's golden rays pierce through the canopy. 3 years into her conservation project studying the region's endangered species, she had grown accustomed to the jungle's rhythms. What she hadn't planned for was the unexpected arrival that would change everything. "They're coming today," she reminded herself, checking her watch. The conservation program had made a controversial decision to introduce specialized guard dogs to combat the increasing problem of poachers who were decimating the local wildlife. Elena had fought against it, arguing that bringing domestic canines into this ecosystem was risky at best, catastrophic at worst. She had been overruled. The distant sound of an approaching vehicle broke her contemplation. The rugged jeep navigated the narrow dirt road, finally coming to a stop in the small clearing by the research station. A tall man with weathered features stepped out, followed by three of the most impressive canines Elena had ever seen. "Dr. Fuentes," the man called, extending his hand. "Miguel Ortiz, canine specialist. Sorry about the delay, road's worse than they told me." Elena nodded curtly, her eyes fixed on the three massive dogs standing attentively beside him. "These are them? The one's headquarters thinks will magically solve our poaching problem." Miguel smiled patiently. "Nothing magical about it. This is Blanco, a 4-year-old Dogo Argentino," he said, gesturing to a muscular white dog with a broad chest and powerful jaw, specialized for hunting large game and with incredible stamina. Next to him is Nero, a Cane Corso, Italian Mastiff breed, extremely intelligent and naturally protective. The dark, imposing dog's steady gaze seemed to assess Elena with equal skepticism. "And this is Tormenta, a female Presa Canario, perhaps the most determined guardian I've ever trained." The tawny-colored Presa had already begun investigating her surroundings, her movements deliberate and calculating. Elena could see the raw power in each animal, but still harbored deep reservations. "These aren't just any guard dogs," Miguel continued, sensing her hesitation. "They've been specifically trained for anti-poaching work. They can track humans through difficult terrain, detect gunpowder and animal blood, and they're skilled enough to detain intruders without lethal force. More importantly, they've been conditioned to ignore wildlife unless commanded otherwise." Elena crossed her arms. "And you think they can survive out here? This isn't some backyard in suburbia. We have jaguars, venomous snakes, parasites." "With respect, Doctor, these breeds were developed for hunting dangerous game and protection in harsh environments. Dogo Argentinos were bred to hunt wild boar and puma. The Presa and Corso are descended from war dogs. They're more capable than you might think." Elena sighed, knowing headquarters had left her no choice. "Fine. You have 2 weeks to prove this program can work, but they're your responsibility, and at the first sign they're disrupting the ecosystem, they go." "Understood." Miguel nodded. "Fair enough, we start training immediately." Over the following days, Elena reluctantly admitted the dogs were impressive. Miguel had them running drills throughout the research compound, teaching them the boundaries of their patrol area, familiarizing them with the scents of the most commonly poached animals, and conducting mock pursuits through increasingly difficult terrain. Despite her initial resistance, Elena found herself drawn to their training sessions. She watched as Blanco, the Dogo Argentino, used his incredible nose to track a scent trail Miguel had laid hours earlier. The dog's white coat stood out against the greens and browns of the jungle floor, yet he moved with surprising stealth. Nero, the Cane Corso, demonstrated an uncanny intelligence. When Miguel set up complex problem-solving scenarios, The massive black dog would pause, assess, and then execute the most efficient solution. His deep chest and powerful shoulders spoke of immense strength, but his eyes revealed something more, a thoughtfulness that unsettled Elena's preconceptions. Tormenta, the female Presa Canario, was perhaps the most fascinating. Slightly smaller than her male counterparts but no less formidable, she exhibited a protective instinct that extended beyond Miguel to include the entire research compound within days. More than once, Elena had noticed the tawny sentinel watching her from across the compound, as if she had already been accepted as part of Tormenta's charge. "They're adapting. Faster than I expected," Miguel admitted on the sixth evening as they reviewed the day's training over dinner. "Tomorrow I think they're ready for an extended patrol, maybe along the eastern boundary where you've had the most poacher activity." Elena pushed her food around her plate. "I don't know, Miguel. They're still dogs, domesticated animals. We've had 2 Jaguar sightings in that area this month alone. That's precisely why we brought them, isn't it? To protect both the wildlife and your team." Miguel leaned forward. "I understand your concern, but you need to trust them, and me. These aren't ordinary dogs." Elena finally nodded. "Eastern boundary, but stay on radio contact every 30 minutes. Any sign of trouble, you turn back immediately." Agreed. Miguel's confidence was unwavering. You might be surprised what they're capable of. The next morning dawned with an unusual heaviness in the air. The typical chorus of birdsong seemed subdued, and the jungle carried a stillness that raised the hair on Elena's arms as she watched Miguel prepare the dogs for their first real patrol. "Maybe wait until tomorrow," she suggested, eyeing the threatening clouds gathering on the horizon. "Looks like a storm's coming." Miguel checked his equipment one last time. "A little rain won't hurt us. We need to establish a presence on that boundary. Every day we delay is another opportunity for poachers." Elena couldn't argue with his logic, but an uneasiness had settled in her stomach. "Just be careful. The terrain gets treacherous when wet, and flash floods aren't uncommon this time of year." With a reassuring smile, Miguel led the 3 dogs to the edge of the clearing. "We'll be back before dark. Tormenta, Nero, Blanco. Vamos." The trio of powerful canines moved with purpose as they followed Miguel into the dense vegetation, quickly disappearing from view. Elena watched the spot where they'd vanished for a long moment before returning to her work, trying to ignore the growing sense of foreboding. The eastern boundary patrol started routinely enough. Miguel kept the dogs in a loose formation as they navigated the increasingly rugged landscape. Blanco took point, his white coat occasionally visible through the vegetation as he ranged slightly ahead, while Nero and Tormenta flanked Miguel on either side. 2 hours into their patrol, they discovered the first sign of trouble, a recently abandoned campsite with telltale signs of poaching activity, snare wire, spent cartridges, and most disturbingly, fresh bloodstains on several leaves. Miguel documented the site and collected the evidence, praising the dogs for their alertness. "Good work," he murmured, particularly to Blanco, who had led them directly to the site. The Dogo Argentino's nostrils flared as he continued to sample the air, clearly detecting scents beyond human perception. It was then that Miguel noticed a change in all 3 dogs' behavior. Tormenta's ears had stiffened, Nero's hackles had risen slightly, and Blanco had gone completely still, the universal canine signal that something significant had been detected. "What is it?" Miguel whispered, scanning their surroundings. The dog's attention focused uniformly toward a dense section of underbrush about 50 yards ahead. Years of working with protection dogs had taught Miguel to trust their instincts implicitly. "Show me," he commanded softly. The trio moved forward cautiously, no longer following a patrol pattern but now in hunting formation, Blanco slightly ahead with Nero and Tormenta spread wide to prevent whatever they were tracking from circling behind them. Miguel followed, his hand resting on the tranquilizer gun at his hip. If they had found poachers, he wanted to be prepared. What they discovered, however, wasn't human. The underbrush opened to reveal a small clearing, and at its center a grizzly scene. A young tapir lay partially consumed, its throat torn out and abdomen opened. The kill was fresh, perhaps only hours old. Jaguar, Miguel breathed, recognizing the distinctive killing method. He scanned the surrounding trees and vegetation with newfound alertness. Jaguars often cached their kills and remained nearby, especially one this recent. As if confirming his assessment, Blanco suddenly stiffened, his gaze fixed on something beyond the clearing. A low, rumbling growl emerged from deep in his chest, a sound Miguel had never heard the disciplined dog make during training. Beside him, Nero and Tormenta had adopted defensive postures, their bodies coiled with tension. Miguel slowly reached for his radio, keeping his movements minimal. "Elena, it's Miguel. We've found evidence of poachers, but also a fresh jaguar kill. The dogs are alerting to something nearby. I think." A deafening crash of thunder cut him off as the threatening storm finally broke. In that same instant, a flash of golden-spotted fur launched from an overhanging branch with terrifying precision. The jaguar had been watching them all along. What followed was chaos. Miguel barely had time to dodge as the big cat sailed past. Him, its original target apparently the vulnerable back of his neck. As he stumbled backward, he caught a glimpse of the massive predator, a male in his prime, easily 200 pounds of pure muscle and predatory instinct. Before the jaguar could reorient for another attack, Blanco intercepted with explosive speed. The white dog slammed into the jaguar's flank with his muscular shoulder, momentarily throwing the cat off balance. The jaguar responded with lightning reflexes, twisting in midair to swipe at Blanco with claws extended. Nero and Tormenta converged, simultaneously from opposite directions, executing a coordinated attack that spoke to their advanced training. Nero targeted the jaguar's hind leg with a powerful bite, while Tormenta darted in to snap at its face, forcing the predator to defend multiple angles. Miguel scrambled to his feet, frantically trying to retrieve his tranquilizer gun, which had been knocked from his holster during the initial chaos. Rain now poured down in blinding sheets, transforming the ground beneath them into treacherous mud. The storm had turned the jungle nearly as dark as twilight, with lightning providing brief strobing illumination of the life-or-death struggle. The jaguar was a formidable opponent. Despite being outnumbered, its natural weapons and lifetime of hunting experience made it extraordinarily dangerous. With a roar that seemed to shake the very air, it managed to throw off Tormenta with a powerful swipe that sent the Presa Canario tumbling several feet away. Miguel finally gripped his tranquilizer gun, but found it impossible to get a clear shot with the dogs and jaguar locked in such close combat. "Back, get back," he shouted, hoping to create enough separation for a clean shot. Either the dogs couldn't hear him over the storm, or the intensity of combat had activated their deepest protective instincts, overriding their training. Blanco darted in again, attempting to seize the jaguar's throat, a classic Dogo Argentino hunting technique developed for taking down wild boar. But the jaguar was far more agile than any boar, and its reflexes allowed it to counter with a bite of its own. Miguel watched in horror as the jaguar's jaws clamped around Blanco's shoulder. The white dog yelped but didn't retreat, instead using the close proximity to drive his own teeth into the jaguar's foreleg. The two animals rolled across the muddy ground, locked together in a deadly embrace. Nero seized the opportunity to launch an assault on the jaguar's exposed flank, his massive jaws clamping down with the incredible pressure the cane Corso breed was known for. The jaguar screamed, a sound so primal it sent chills down Miguel's spine despite the heat of the moment. A deafening crack split the air as lightning struck a nearby tree. The sudden impact and explosion of bark caused all combatants to momentarily disengage. In that fractional pause, Miguel saw his opportunity. He raised the tranquilizer gun, centered the jaguar in his sights, and fired. The dart struck true, embedding in the big cat's shoulder. But tranquilizers weren't instantaneous, and this moment of vulnerability only enraged the jaguar further. With renewed fury, it charged toward Miguel, identifying him perhaps as the source of this new pain. Tormenta intercepted the charge with breathtaking courage. The Presa Canario hurled herself directly into the jaguar's path, absorbing the full impact of the larger predator. The collision sent both animals tumbling down a sudden, rain-slicked slope that Miguel hadn't noticed in the storm's darkness. A ravine carved by the increasing deluge. "Tormenta!" Miguel shouted, rushing to the edge in time to see both dog and jaguar sliding and rolling down the muddy incline. Blanco and Nero were already scrambling down after them, navigating the treacherous descent with remarkable agility. Miguel attempted to follow but lost his footing almost immediately. The world spun as he tumbled uncontrollably down the ravine, striking rocks and exposed roots. A sudden impact to his head sent darkness closing in from all sides. His last conscious thought was of the dogs, alone now, facing a wounded and cornered apex predator. When Miguel regained consciousness, the storm's intensity had somewhat diminished. Rain still fell steadily, but the thunder had moved off into the distance. Disoriented and aching, he touched the side of his head, and his fingers came away bloody. How long had he been unconscious? Minutes? Hours? A soft whine nearby brought his attention snapping back to the present situation. Turning carefully, he saw Nero standing a few feet away, the Cane Corso's dark coat slick with rain and what appeared to be blood. "Nero," Miguel called weakly. The dog approached, licking Miguel's face once before turning to look down the ravine, with clear urgency. "The others? Where are Blanco and Tormenta?" With effort, Miguel pulled himself upright, using a nearby tree for support. The ravine had deposited them into a small valley dense with vegetation. In the dim light, he could just make out a path of disturbed plants and mud, a trail left by struggling animals. "Lead me," Miguel instructed Nero, who immediately began moving down the crude trail, pausing frequently to ensure Miguel was following. They hadn't gone far when Miguel heard it, the unmistakable sound of growling, punctuated by labored breathing. Pushing through a curtain of dripping vines, he emerged into a small clearing dominated by an enormous fallen tree. What he saw there stopped him cold. Blanco stood with his back to the massive log, blood staining his white coat crimson along his shoulder and flank. Before him lay the Jaguar, its sides heaving with each breath, clearly affected now by the tranquilizer, but still conscious and dangerous. And most surprisingly, positioned between them was Tormenta, not engaging either combatant but maintaining a tense standoff. As Miguel watched, he realized what was happening. The Presa Canario was not just standing between Blanco and the Jaguar, she was guarding something. Squinting through the rain, Miguel could just make out a small dark shape behind Tormenta, partially hidden by the exposed roots of the fallen tree. Cubs. The Jaguar had cubs. The realization hit Miguel with stunning clarity. This wasn't a random encounter or territorial defense. The Jaguar was a mother protecting her young. The kill they had found was her providing for her cubs. The entire confrontation suddenly made perfect sense and filled Miguel with regret. "Hold," he commanded softly, approaching the tableau with extreme caution. The Jaguar's eyes tracked him, but her movements were becoming increasingly sluggish as the tranquilizer took greater effect. Remarkably, she made no move to attack, perhaps recognizing the standoff for what it was, or simply too affected by the drug to risk another engagement. Tormenta maintained her position, though her posture subtly shifted as Miguel approached. Not threatening, but clearly communicating that she had made a decision about this situation that even her handler might not override. Behind her, Miguel could now see two small jaguar cubs, perhaps only a few months old, huddled together in the hollow formed by the fallen tree's roots. "Remarkable," Miguel whispered. Somehow, during the chaos of the fight and his unconsciousness, something extraordinary had happened. Tormenta, bred for centuries to be a guardian, had recognized the mother jaguar's motivation and made a choice that transcended her training. As the jaguar's eyelids grew heavy, Miguel carefully checked each. Dog for injuries. Blanco had suffered several deep lacerations from the jaguar's claws and a significant bite wound to his shoulder, but no life-threatening injuries. Nero had fared better, with only minor cuts. Tormenta, surprisingly, showed less damage than Miguel expected, though a long gash ran across her flank. The radio at Miguel's hip crackled suddenly, making all animals tense. "Miguel! Miguel, come in!" Elena's voice was frantic with worry. "You missed 2 check-ins. Are you all right? I'm organizing a search party." Miguel unclipped the radio with his free hand. "Elena, we're alive. Situation complex. We've had an encounter with a jaguar, a mother with cubs. Dogs are injured but stable. I'm hurt but conscious. Our location is approximately 2 kilometers east of the last checkpoint, down in a ravine system." "Thank God." Elena's relief was palpable. "Stay put. We'll find you. Are you in immediate danger?" Miguel looked at the tableau before him. 3 specialized protection dogs, a tranquilized jaguar mother, and her cubs, all existing in a fragile peace orchestrated by Tormenta's unexpected choice. "No immediate danger," he replied. "But bring medical supplies for both humans and canines. And Elena, bring your wildlife transport equipment. We have some conservation work to do." While they waited for rescue, Miguel witnessed something he would remember for the rest of his career. As the mother jaguar finally succumbed to unconsciousness, her cubs began mewling in distress. Tormenta, the Presa Canario, moved closer to them, not with aggression, but with the same protective posture she had shown at the research station. After a cautious assessment, she lay down beside the root hollow, physically placing herself between the vulnerable cubs and the outside world. Blanco and Nero, following her lead, created a perimeter around the entire scene, guarding not just Miguel but also the unconscious jaguar and her young. It was as if some deeper understanding had awakened in these domesticated predators, some recognition of their place in the natural world that transcended their breeding and training. When Elena and the rescue team finally located them, their astonishment matched Miguel's own. "I don't believe what I'm seeing," Elena whispered as she took in the scene. "They're protecting them?" Miguel nodded, wincing as the movement aggravated his head injury. Tormenta figured it out first. The jaguar was defending her cubs. We inadvertently got between them when she was returning from hunting. These dogs were bred to fight, to guard, to protect. But somehow they recognized what was happening here was no different from what they themselves would do. The research station's veterinarian immediately began treating the dog's wounds, while Elena supervised the careful handling of the still sedated jaguar mother. The cubs, initially terrified of the humans, seemed to take their cues from Tormenta's calm presence, allowing themselves to be gently placed in a transport carrier only after the Presa Canario had inspected it with apparent approval. "We'll relocate them deeper into the protected zone," Elena decided. "Away from the poaching routes, but still within their natural territory. And we'll tag the mother for tracking before she fully recovers." Miguel, now receiving treatment for his own injuries, nodded. "And the dogs?" Elena looked at the 3 canines who, despite their wounds, maintained vigilant attention on the jaguar family's handling. "I think I was wrong about them," she admitted. "They're not just intrusions in this ecosystem. They understood something fundamental today, something many humans never grasp. The boundaries between wild and domestic aren't as rigid as we pretend." 3 days later, Miguel stood on the research station's deck, watching as Elena reviewed data on her tablet. His head was bandaged and his body ached from various bruises, but he felt a profound sense of satisfaction as he observed the 3 dogs resting nearby. Their wounds had been treated and were healing well, though Blanco would carry impressive scars from his encounter with the jaguar. "Her signal is strong," Elena reported, showing Miguel the tracking data for the relocated jaguar. "She's hunting successfully and staying with her cubs in the new territory. No signs of distress or unusual behavior." Miguel nodded. "And headquarters? What do they make of all this?" Elena's laugh held genuine amusement. "They're calling it an unqualified success, though not for the reasons they expected. The anti-poaching dog program has been approved for expansion, but with some significant modifications based on your recommendations." "Good," Miguel said, reaching down to scratch behind Tormenta's ears. The Presa Canario leaned into his touch but kept her gaze fixed on the jungle's edge, ever the guardian. "They need to understand these aren't just tools or weapons against poachers. What happened out there was something more profound." Elena sat beside him, her initial skepticism now replaced with respectful curiosity. "Tell me again what you saw before I arrived with the rescue team. I need to include every detail in my report." Miguel considered his words carefully. "When I regained consciousness and found them, the dynamic had already shifted. Somehow, during the fight or its aftermath, Tormenta recognized that the Jaguar was a mother protecting her young, and instead of continuing the battle to its natural conclusion, which likely would have been 3 dogs overwhelming even a Jaguar eventually, she made a different choice." He gestured toward the Presa Canario, whose attention had briefly shifted to their conversation at the sound of her name. She positioned herself as a guardian not of us against the Jaguar, but of the entire situation. She protected the cubs from potential harm, whether from us or even from Blanco and Nero's continued aggression, and the others followed her lead. "But why?" Elena pressed. "These are dogs bred for centuries to fight and protect human interests. How did they overcome those instincts?" Miguel smiled. "Because protection isn't just about fighting. True guardianship, the deepest instinct we've bred into these dogs, is about preserving what's vulnerable. Tormenta recognized vulnerability in those cubs that transcended the boundaries between wild and domestic." He looked at each dog in turn. Blanco, the Dogo Argentino, whose breeding had honed his courage and physical power. Nero, the Cane Corso, whose intelligence and assessment of the situation had prevented further bloodshed. And Tormenta, the Presa Canario, whose protective nature had expanded beyond her human handlers to encompass a more universal understanding of guardianship. "I think what we witnessed was evolution in action," Miguel continued. "Not physical evolution, but something more immediate, the evolution of understanding. These dogs, removed from their ancestral context and placed in this primeval environment, recognized something essential about their role. They're not here to dominate the jungle. They're here to protect its balance just as we are." Elena considered this. "So what does this mean for the program going forward?" "It means we adapt, just as they did," Miguel said firmly. "We train them not just to detect and deter poachers, but to understand the ecosystem they're helping to protect. These 3 have already started that journey. They've encountered the apex predator of this jungle and reached an understanding with her. That's a foundation we can build on." In the weeks that followed, the research station developed new protocols for the canine program. Rather than focusing exclusively on anti-poaching patrols, the dogs became integrated into the broader conservation efforts. They accompanied researchers on wildlife monitoring expeditions, learned to track multiple species without engaging them, and developed an uncanny ability to alert handlers to animals in distress or unusual behavior patterns that might indicate ecosystem imbalances. Most remarkably, the 3 dogs who had faced the Jaguar demonstrated a particular sensitivity to big cat territories. They could detect and alert to Jaguar presence well before humans noticed any signs, and their behavior subtly shifted when entering known Jaguar hunting grounds, not with fear, but with what Miguel could only describe as professional courtesy, one predator acknowledging another's domain. On a particularly clear evening 6 months after the encounter, Miguel and Elena sat on the research station's deck, watching the 3 dogs patrolling the perimeter of the compound with their characteristic vigilance. In the distance, just within range of their spotting scope, a familiar shape moved through the underbrush, the tagged female Jaguar, now a regular visitor to the edges of the station's territory. "She's getting bolder," Elena observed, adjusting the scope for a better view. "This is the 3rd time this week she's hunted this close to the compound." Miguel watched as Blanco, his white coat gleaming in the fading light, paused to stare in the Jaguar's direction. The dog made no move to alert or intercept, simply acknowledging the big cat's presence before continuing his rounds. "I don't think it's boldness," Miguel replied. "I think it's recognition. She remembers them and what happened that day. In her own way, she's established a relationship with this place and its guardians." Elena lowered the scope, turning to study Miguel's expression. "You really believe that? That a wild Jaguar could form some kind of understanding with domestic dogs?" "6 months ago, I would have said no," Miguel admitted. "But now, after everything we've witnessed, I think we dramatically underestimate the capacity of animals to comprehend their relationships to each other and the world around them. He gestured toward the three dogs, now gathered at the compound's edge, all facing the last position where the jaguar had been visible. Look at them. They're not alerting us to a threat. They're acknowledging her presence, respecting her territory, just as she respects theirs. It's a dialogue that transcends species. As if to emphasize his point, a distant roar echoed through the jungle, the distinctive sound of a female jaguar marking her territory. Seconds later, Tormenta threw back her head and released a resonant bay that was immediately joined by Blanco and Nero. The canine chorus rang out across the clearing, neither challenging nor submissive, but conversational. When they fell silent, the jaguar called once more, slightly closer this time before the sounds of her movement faded into the deeper jungle. "Unbelievable," Elena whispered. "It's like they're talking to each other." "They are," Miguel said with absolute conviction. "Not with words as we understand them, but with something more fundamental, a language of mutual recognition and respect." He reached down to stroke Tormenta's head as the Presa Canario returned to the deck, her expression serene despite the recent exchange with a predator that, by all conventional understanding, should have been her mortal enemy. "What happened that day in the ravine wasn't just a random encounter," Miguel continued. "It was a turning point. For these dogs, for that jaguar, and for our understanding of what conservation truly means. It's not just about preserving species in isolation, it's about fostering relationships. Between them, even unlikely ones." Elena nodded slowly, her scientific skepticism gradually giving way to the evidence of her own observations over the past months. "So, where do we go from here? This goes well beyond our original mandate for the canine program." Miguel smiled. "We learn from them. These dogs haven't just adapted to their role in this ecosystem, they've transcended it. They've become something more than protection animals or anti-poaching tools. They've become mediators between worlds." As the last light faded from the sky, the three dogs settled into their customary positions around the deck, Blanco facing east, Nero west, and Tormenta to the north, toward where the jaguar had disappeared. Their postures were relaxed but attentive, guardians not just of the humans they had been trained to protect, but of something larger, the delicate balance of an ecosystem where domestic and wild, human and animal existed in tenuous harmony. In the darkness beyond the compound, the eyes of the jungle watched, countless species whose lives had been touched directly or indirectly by this unprecedented alliance. Among them, a spotted shadow moved with liquid grace, her cubs, now adolescents, learning to hunt by her side. The jaguar paused at the very edge of the cleared area, amber eyes reflecting the distant lights of the research station. For a moment, predator and protectors regarded each other across the boundary between their worlds. Then, with a flick of her tail, she melted back into the jungle that was her home, leaving the night to be guarded by those who had once been her enemies, but were now, in some profound and unexpected way, her allies in survival. The encounter between the specialized protection dogs and the jaguar had begun as a battle for survival, three domesticated predators facing nature's perfect killer on its own turf. It had transformed into something far more significant, a bridge between the human world of conservation science and the ancient rhythms of the jungle. The Dogo Argentino's raw courage, the Cane Corso's tactical intelligence, and the Presa Canario's transcendent understanding of guardianship had not conquered the wilderness, but had instead found their place within it. In this remote corner of the jungle, an unprecedented experiment continued to unfold, not the one that headquarters had originally authorized, but something far more profound. It was a daily demonstration that the boundaries we draw between wild and domestic, between natural and human domains, are perhaps more permeable than we had ever imagined. And in that permeability lay hope for a world where coexistence might replace conflict, where protection extended beyond species boundaries, and where the ancient dance between predators could evolve into something resembling respect. Every evening, Now, as darkness fell over the research station, the sound of distant roars and answering bays floated across the compound, a conversation between species that no human could fully translate, but whose meaning was nevertheless clear to those who had witnessed its beginning. Acknowledgement, territory, mutual recognition, the language of predators who had looked into each other's eyes and seen not just an enemy, but a reflection of their own essential nature. For Miguel, watching his three remarkable companions maintain their vigilant protection of the research station while simultaneously honoring the presence of the jungle's apex predator, it was a daily reminder of how much humans still had to learn from the animals they presumed to protect and control. True guardianship, he had discovered, was not about dominance but about balance. A lesson these three domesticated protectors had somehow grasped more profoundly than many of the humans who had bred and trained them. And so the work continued. Each day brought new discoveries, new adaptations, and new depths to the relationship between the dogs, the researchers, and the jungle they had all come to protect in their own ways. The battle in the ravine had ended, not with victory or defeat, but with understanding, an outcome far more valuable than either side prevailing over the other. In the ever-shifting balance of the jungle, where life and death played out with brutal efficiency every day, these three remarkable canines had found a purpose that transcended their breeding and training. They had become not conquerors but conversationalists, not weapons but bridges. In doing so, they had demonstrated a truth that humans too often forgot, that protection in its truest form was not about power, but about perception, the ability to see beyond immediate conflict to the deeper harmony that sustained all life. As Miguel often observed to Elena, watching Tormenta maintain her nightly vigil facing the Jaguar's territory, the greatest guardians are not those who fight the hardest, but those who understand most deeply what truly needs protection. The jungle's embrace under stars that had witnessed the ancient dance of predator and prey for millennia, that understanding continued to evolve, one bark, one roar, one day at a time.